At the forthcoming BRICS summit in Kazan, a primary focus will be on reforming international financial institutions, notably the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has highlighted the crucial need to address these reforms to improve the global economic governance framework, making it more inclusive and reflective of emerging economies' interests. The BRICS nations, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are advocating for changes that better align with the 21st century economic landscape. They assert that the current IMF and WTO structures are skewed in favor of developed countries, failing to adequately represent the Global South's interests. Among their proposals are adjustments to the IMF's quota system to grant greater influence to developing countries and the restoration of the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism to its full operational capacity. This video delves into the underlying dissatisfaction with the IMF and WTO, exploring instances where their policies have adversely affected borrowing nations. Additionally, it discusses the solutions proposed by the Global South to address these issues. Countries impacted by IMF policies. Morocco's agreement with the IMF required removing food subsidies, leading to sharp price hikes and subsequent riots in Casablanca. The government's harsh crackdown on protests led to significant social unrest and long-term political consequences. Let's take a moment. If you enjoy our content, please hit the like button. We'd also love to hear your thoughts and feedback in the comments. Your engagement helps us grow. Thank you. Brazil obtained an IMF loan to stabilize its currency during a financial crisis, with conditions including fiscal austerity and structural reforms. Although these measures faced significant opposition due to their impact on public services and economic growth, some argue they helped stabilize Brazil's economy in the long run. IMF imposed austerity measures in Venezuela led to the Caracazo riots, triggered by the removal of fuel subsidies. The resulting violence and deaths significantly influenced the political landscape, contributing to the rise of Hugo Chavez. During the Asian financial crisis, Indonesia agreed to an IMF program that required austerity measures and financial sector reforms. The ensuing economic hardship led to widespread riots and the eventual fall of President Suharto's regime. To secure an IMF loan, Egypt had to eliminate subsidies on basic food items, causing significant price increases and sparking the bread riots. Military intervention was required to restore order, and the government eventually reinstated the subsidies to calm the unrest. The IMF's Structural Adjustment Program for Nigeria involved removing subsidies and devaluing the currency, sparking widespread protests and violent uprisings in 1989. These economic measures severely impacted Nigeria's economy and social stability. Pakistan has engaged in multiple IMF programs since 1988, often involving fiscal austerity and subsidy cuts. These measures have frequently led to economic hardship, protests, and political instability. In the 1990s, Kenya's IMF Structural Adjustment Program involved privatizing state-owned enterprises and reducing public spending, resulting in economic stagnation, increased poverty, and widespread social unrest. Structural adjustment programs. Critics argue that SAPs heavily implemented in the 1980s and 1990s increased poverty and social inequality by prioritizing debt repayment and fiscal stability over social welfare and economic development. Undermining sovereignty. The IMF's economic policy conditions are seen as undermining the sovereignty of borrower nations, limiting their ability to design and implement their development strategies. Bias and decision-making concerns exist about biased decision-making within the IMF that favors the interests of its major shareholders, primarily developed countries, leading to interventions that do not align with the needs of the Global South. Debt burden. The IMF's approach to debt restructuring is often viewed as inadequate, failing to provide meaningful debt relief and exacerbating debt crises. Impact on social services. The IMF's focus on fiscal consolidation often results in cuts to essential public services like healthcare and education, hindering long-term development and exacerbating social inequalities. Imbalance in trade rules, WTO. Trade rules often disproportionately benefit developed countries, particularly through agreements like TRIPS, which can hinder access to essential medicines and technologies for developing countries. Negotiation power disparity. Developing countries often lack the resources to effectively negotiate within the WTO, resulting in outcomes that favor wealthier nations. Institutional issues and plurilateral agreements. The move towards plurilateral agreements can marginalize countries not part of the negotiations, often those from the Global South, undermining the multilateral principles of the WTO. Transparency and notification. Issues with transparency and compliance with notification requirements within the WTO erode trust and complicate negotiations and enforcement of agreements. Dispute settlement mechanism. Challenges in the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism, particularly with appointing new judges, disproportionately affect smaller and developing countries relying on it to resolve trade disputes. Reforming conditionalities. The Global South suggests more flexible and context-specific loan conditions from the IMF that consider the socio-economic realities of borrower nations, enhancing representation and governance. Developing countries advocate for more equitable representation in IMF decision-making processes, with a reallocation of quotas and voting shares to reflect the global economic landscape. Establishing a multilateral legal framework for debt. Creating a multilateral legal framework for debt negotiations within the United Nations would provide a fairer platform for restructuring debt, addressing power imbalances. Promoting sustainable development goals. Aligning IMF policies with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, integrating social and environmental considerations into economic policies, and supporting projects that promote sustainable development. Encouraging local ownership of programs. Involving local governments and communities in designing and implementing IMF-supported programs ensures they are tailored to the specific needs of the country. Increasing transparency and accountability. Improving transparency and accountability in IMF operations, including clearer communication of policy recommendations and regular assessments of program impacts. Support for capacity building. Providing more support for capacity building, including training and technical assistance, to help developing countries improve their economic management and policy-making capabilities. Addressing these issues within the IMF and WTO requires comprehensive reforms to ensure fair and inclusive global economic governance that adequately represents the interests of all member countries. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching and joining us today. If you found our content valuable or inspiring, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Your support means a lot to us. You can watch another video from our channel, which is now on the screen.